the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across and now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining us this Tuesday. And of course, as many of you are well aware in the listening audience, you are today voting March 15th. In Florida, 99 delegates up for grabs, Illinois 66, Missouri 49, North Carolina 69, and then also Ohio 63. Also 6 more in Northern Marianas. So 352 delegates at stake today. We're going to spend some time in the second hour getting into that in a lot more detail. We'll certainly cover all of it tomorrow, and that is certainly our plan. Matter of fact, in the second hour, we're going to get into some of the questions that people have had about some of the candidates from a religious perspective. Buddy Pilgrim will be with us, and he is a supporter of Ted Cruz and actually the national director for faith and religious liberty for Ted Cruz. Tomorrow we have Robert Jeffers in studio, and I suspect he'll have some things to say about his support for Donald Trump. So we'll get into those issues in just a bit. But I thought before we get into almost 2 full days of covering the campaign and the elections, might, as we did yesterday, take a little bit of a break and to focus on some very important issues. And one of those, which we've never really had much time to address here on Point of View, is what happens when we have young girls and even young women who find themselves not pretty. And in one way or another, they may be, but their perception is different. And so we deal with, for example, these eating disorders that have been such a plague in the society today. Individuals who oftentimes say that they don't feel beautiful, they don't feel pretty, they aren't thin enough. Matter of fact, the mortality rate associated with anorexia alone is 12 times higher than the death rate associated with other causes of death for females in their teen years. 95% of those who have eating disorders are between the ages of 12 and 25. And this is just one of many problems. And so since we've talked about everything from mental health and suicide, in some respects, some of these eating disorders are slow motion suicide. And we wanted to look at this from a biblical perspective, as we do so often. And there is a new book out, which we certainly do commend to you. It's published by Waterbrook, entitled Beauty Begins, Making Peace with Your Reflection. Now, for those of you that teach Sunday school classes, you probably use some of the great material that's come out of the Woodlands Church by Kerry and Chris Shook. And Chris Shook is with us today. She is the co-author with her husband of 2 New York Times best-selling books, 1 Month to Live and Be the Message. And, of course, she and her husband founded Woodlands Church. And, Chris, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you so much, Kerby. I am so excited to talk about this topic with you because my daughter and I really have a passion for getting God's truth out about what beauty truly is.
Let's also introduce Megan Shook Alpha, who is a graduate of Baylor University and works as a pastor to students at the Woodlands. And so, Megan, thank you for joining us as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kerby. My mom and I are so excited to be here and just having the opportunity to get to share this book with everybody.
Since you are younger and your mother and I are a little bit older, talk about the younger generation for just a minute, because I just rattled off 1 or 2 of the statistics from your book. But as you go through this is a issue that everyone should be paying attention to inside and outside the church. And yet I can't think of too many books that I know that are written by Christians on this topic.
Yeah, definitely. That's a really good reason why we wrote the book, is because we feel like there's a lot of young women that are dealing with this issue now, mainly because of media and our culture these days and everything they see on social media and the internet. But we did a survey at our church for ages 12 through 18 girls, and we asked them the question, if you could change anything about the way you look, would you? More than 70% of them answered yes. And then we also ask them, on a scale of 1 to 10, how beautiful do you think you are? With 1 being, I can't think of anything I like about myself, and 10 being, I'm completely content. And only 11% of those girls said, I'm completely content and at peace with my reflection. And this is an issue that not only do just women deal with, but we're seeing that Christian women deal with. It doesn't matter if you're Christian or not. You deal with self-image problems and feeling like you're not worthy or that you're not beautiful enough.
Sure. Let me come to you, Chris, for just a minute, because I was going to talk about that survey that was done in your church. And, the scriptures talk about the fact that Paul said, I learned to be content in whatever circumstance I find myself. Now, he was talking about whether you were wealthy or poor, or what circumstance. But again, it's pretty sad within your own church, which is a very good Bible teaching church, high praise for what you and your husband have done over the years, that still you had most women saying, I really can't be content with how I look.
You are so right, Kerby. And that's the thing that Megan and I found so disturbing, as we have spent a lot of time together through the years with both her friends and mine, so our 2 different generations. We started to realize that the conversations of both generations tended to gravitate to the same topics, the same things, and that is insecurity and dissatisfaction with our looks, or in other words, exactly what you were talking about. Just not being content. There's just a lack of contentment underlying women across the generations. And so we started to realize the conversations were very much the same, whether it was with Megan's friends, younger friends, or with mine. The same kind of things are said among women. Things like, oh, I just feel so fat, or I need to go on a diet, or, oh, me too. And everybody jumps on the bandwagon and talks about just how bad they feel about themselves.
Sure. And a lot of this comes back, let's look at it from a biblical point of view, because even though these might be Christian women, we still live in a world, and of course your first chapter is about distorted reflection. And so whether it's the world, the flesh, or the devil, but we'll give devil his due for just a minute, that, Satan is the father of lies. And so we have to recognize that even if we are in the church, we're still in the world and influenced by some really distorted values, aren't we?
Absolutely. And the Bible tells us that our enemy is out to steal, kill, and destroy us, not just to mess around with us a little bit or make us have a bad day, but we need to understand that our enemy is actually out to steal, kill, and destroy our lives, to steal our self-worth, steal our sense of value in the Lord, to kill our dreams and destroy the hopes that we have in ourselves of being like Christ. And of course, Christ is victorious, and he is stronger. And that's the truth that we have to learn as Christian women to remember and put into practice in our lives every day.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to continue our conversation today. This book is entitled Beauty Begins, Making Peace with Your Reflection. And we're going to spend a little bit of time on it. And then, of course, we'll get back to what's happening in the election. But if you would like to join us today, I suspect some of you have some comments, some questions, maybe your own testimony. I'd love to hear from you. The book is published by Waterbrook. We have information about Chris and Megan on our website, pointofview.net, and also information about the book. You'll probably be able to find it in your local bookstore, but if not, we've made it very easy for you to order it. And again, just realize that anorexia is the 3rd most common chronic illness among adolescents. 86% of young women reported the onset of an eating disorder by age 20. That's 86%. Those of you that are pastors and Bible fellowship leaders and Sunday school leaders, you need to pay attention to this issue. That's why we're talking about it today here on Point of View. We'll continue our conversation with Chris and Megan right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
2 questions I hear with some regularity are, what is the FBI going to do, and when is the FBI going to do it? The questions surrounding the current investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails and apparent disregard for national security. As I've mentioned in the previous commentaries, other people have been indicted for much less. The Democratic debates and primaries are taking place right now, and the Democratic National Convention takes place a few months from now in July. Few Democratic voters seem concerned about the email scandal, but they will be very concerned if the FBI recommends an indictment. The Democratic Party might also want to reconsider whether they would run Hillary Clinton for the presidency if the FBI recommends that she be indicted. Waiting until a grand jury actually indicts her would actually upset the nominating process. The delegates of the convention might want to consider another candidate like Joe Biden or even Bernie Sanders. Of course, there's the possibility that even if the FBI recommends indictment, Attorney General Loretta Lynch would refuse to do so. She might argue that the evidence was not sufficient. She might argue that an indictment would politicize the political campaign. If the Attorney General did not actually indict, what would be the response from the FBI Director James Comey? I assume that he and some of his staff might resign. Those of us who lived through the Watergate scandal might remember that Elliot Richardson and William Ruckelshaus actually resigned rather than carry out President Nixon's order. People who know James Comey say he probably would not resign, but instead release the incriminating information surrounding Hillary Clinton's actions. That would certainly have a negative influence on her campaign. It's time for the FBI and the Attorney General to act so that Democratic primary voters and general election voters can make an intelligent decision on who will serve as president. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Columbia Pictures and Affirm Films, Miracles from Heaven. How do we explain the impossible? In theaters March 16th, rated PG. miraclesfromheaven-movie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Talking today about the book Beauty Begins, Making Peace with Your Reflection. It is written by Chris Shook and Megan Shook Alpha, and it is published by Waterbrook, and I think it would be a very helpful book to understand some of the challenges that young women face in a culture which is full of the false and distorted images we talk about here. So again, making peace with your reflection, very important. And we also have a link to the website, beautybegins.com. I would encourage you to click on that and perhaps even watch the little video that is there and consider sharing some of this information with other people that you know that might need to hear that. Chris, let me come back to maybe a positive look. We've talked about some of the negative aspects of that, but early on you also talk about the fingerprints of the master artists, and you use the idea that if you walk through a museum, as I have, and I think most of us have, you see these beautiful paintings. You don't jump up there and say, well, I guess somebody spilled a bucket of paint on that canvas. You recognize as you see the beauty in that canvas that it reflects back on the artist. Well, so we, I think, should look at individuals in light of what God has done in our lives, shouldn't we?
Absolutely, Kerby. We've found that, as you said, I really love that you pointed out that we are so much like masterpieces, can be compared to a masterpiece of art as we age, because in our culture, aging is thought to be a horrible thing. Basically, that's the reason everyone is always focused on what we look like and how we can look better, and then we're very visually driven culture, even more so because of technology, which radically magnifies the feeling that what's on the outside is all that counts. And the truth of God is, of course, that He determines our value, and our value is determined when God looks at us and we have accepted Christ. He sees the value of Christ, what Christ has done for us in our lives. And that value has nothing to do, absolutely nothing to do with what we look like on the outside. The truth is that all things of true value actually increase with age. as a painting does. And we have that experience, that long walk with Christ, where not that the road was perfect, but we've learned to become that don't look like Christ are gradually chipped away so that we can become more like him. And that's where we're really beautiful, is the places in our lives that look the most like Christ. In the book, we talk about being pretty versus being beautiful.
Sure. Well, we can get to that. Yeah, let's talk about that, because
Yeah.
I was going to bring that up in just a minute, but since you brought it up, what is the difference? Because a lot of people say pretty, beautiful, those are just synonyms, but you make a distinction in the book.
Yeah, in the book, Kerby, we talk about pretty and beautiful. There's a difference. Things that are pretty are temporary, outward. They're not going to last, just as the style changes from year to year. What looks good, what clothing, what you do with your hair, it always is constantly changing. But with beauty, it's inner. It's something that is everlasting and is never going to change. And that's what we need to be working on. We're wasting our time focusing on things on the outside that are going to change. It's never going to be the same again. But we need to be focusing on our inner beauty and cultivating that, because that is going to be everlasting.
And so again, sometimes we even see this in 2 Corinthians 4, where the Apostle Paul says it outward we're wasting away. Megan, you don't understand that, but Chris and I are a little older. We recognize that. But inwardly, we're being renewed day by day. And I'm the oldest one around the table, so I can say that. You know, you get a little bit older and you recognize that the outward part isn't working so well, but the inward is. And that's really what it's all about in 2 Corinthians 4, to recognize that sometimes we focus on the temporary and the pretty rather than the eternal and the beautiful. Is that fair?
Absolutely fair. I really appreciate that you pointed out that perception, what a girl's perception of how they look or how they feel, if they feel beautiful or not, is a huge factor in driving eating disorders and all kinds of things that come out of this insecurity that we have. The main thing is that we really found, as we took a closer look, that mothers who are insecure about themselves, despite their best efforts in telling their daughters, and truly believing it, telling their daughters, honey, you are beautiful. It's what's on the inside that counts. You are so perfectly and beautiful on the inside. And we teach them about Christ. But then we turn to the mirror, and our daughters see us saying, oh, I look horrible on this. I look fat. Oh, my hair is this. My shape is that. Criticizing ourselves. And, of course, young girls who, to them, their mother is the most beautiful person in the world. If they see their mother criticizing herself, it doesn't really matter what our words are to them. They take on our actions. And so we have generations of grandmothers, mothers, daughters, and goes on of insecure women bringing up insecure women. Our girls follow in those footsteps that we thought we had covered up.
Yes.
We think that we can speak the truth to them, but yet somehow we don't really internalize it in our own lives and realize, no, our personal beauty doesn't come from our looks. Our beauty comes from Christ, comes from being like him. And that's the chains need to be broken. We have to decide that we'll be the generation that says, no, I'm going to actually live the truth, not just speak it to my children.
Megan, you tell a story of when your dad took you to a carnival and went to the House of Mirrors. And since we're talking about mirrors for just a minute, some of those mirrors are intentionally distorted. And yet, as your mother just was sharing, sometimes even if you look at the mirror, your perception is distorted even when the mirror is giving you an accurate reflection. What are your thoughts about that? Yeah,
it's true. In the book, we talk about that there's 3 different mirrors that we're usually looking into. And it's our peers, our parents, and our culture. Mm-hmm. And these mirrors are things that we are looking into, and we're trying to find our worth and our acceptance. And do you like me? Do you love me? Am I beautiful? When really those things are always going to come back as maybe, yes, no. You never know, because as people, we're selfish and we're sinful, and we can never be truly satisfied with people. And that's why, we have that relationship with Christ. And we need to realize that we are never going to be satisfied from people with our beauty. That if we look to social media and we try to get likes on Instagram or Facebook, that's never going to satisfy. If we look to our parents to say that we're beautiful, sometimes they're going to let us down. And if we look to our friends and our peers, even though they could be great Christians and awesome girls, sometimes they're going to stab us in the back and things are going to happen because people are imperfect. But we have to look to our perfect God, who's always going to give us that true reflection of what we really look like.
You know, you talk about in the book the selfie obsession, but Megan, you're part of the selfie generation.
Yes.
And I think that has taken a problem that has always existed and made it worse, don't you think?
No, I really do think so. I feel like we want people to look at us. It's funny because a lot of times, even with talking with girls, like, oh, do I look good? Or, oh, I don't, or even saying, I don't look good today. And they're talking about themselves. And this selfie obsession is just giving girls another opportunity to point the mirror towards them and saying, everyone look at me, and point out my flaws maybe and point out what I look like. And we're just giving other people opportunities to look at us when really it shouldn't be about us in the first place. We're making everyone try and look at me, but really nobody is spending their time looking at you. They're thinking about themselves in the end.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, Chris, I want to maybe have you speak a little bit to what's on the website. We always like to do that at kind of the bottom of the hour because there's an interactive study that individuals can be a part of, and there are all sorts of resources. There are social media downloads and a variety of resources that I think you will find very helpful, and, of course, a way that you can get the book, get the study, and much more. You probably can find it in your local bookstore, but we have all the links so that you can just go to beautybegins.com to get some of that material. And when we come back, we'll also continue our conversation, but also open up the phones. If you'd like to join the conversation today, perhaps this is resonating with you in some way. Perhaps you've been thinking about this. Perhaps it's an issue that you've had to deal with or your church has had to deal with. We certainly welcome your phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. Let me also encourage you to go to our website today because we have, of course, a lot of resources that we have posted. Some of them have sources, but even if you've already voted or already know who you're going to vote for, we encourage you to go back and click on that because we have a place for you to take the pledge. And this is a pledge where you would commit, number one, to pray for our nation and the upcoming election. Number two, to educate others on the issues and encourage them to get involved. And number three, to vote for candidates who support our values. When you think about what is at stake, whether it's the Supreme Court, the next president appointing 2 or 3 justices, whether it's the debt, whether it's the war on terrorism, so many issues. And so we encourage you to take the pledge as you visit the website, pointofview.net. We'll continue our conversation with Chris Shook and Megan Shook Alpha right after these important messages.
Is it just me, or does this year's election seem more contentious than ever? Even Christians are divided between which candidate to support, but one thing we must agree upon is the need to pray together. Each and every one of us must be on our knees asking God's mercy. Who is the right one to name the next Supreme Court justice, or 2 or 3? Honestly, I don't know, but God does, and we must petition Him to act. Point of View has created its own campaign in the midst of the presidential campaign, Pray, Organize, Vote. We want to remind you of things to pray about. We want to help you educate fellow believers and get them out to vote. Sign up today at pointofview.net. Click on the banner, Pray, Organize, and Vote. The future of America is at stake, and God's people are called to be good stewards of our votes. After you sign up, look at the bottom right corner for the red box that says Donate. Your gift will educate and motivate Christians during this critical time. Don't put it off. Visit now, pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect
511212. Continue for a few minutes with Chris Shook and Megan Shook Alpha as we talk about their book Beauty Begins, and then we'll get back into the campaign and election 2016 that's pretty much going to dominate the rest of our week, in large part because many of you listening today in Florida, Illinois, Missouri, North Carolina, and Ohio are voting. Some of you very soon will be voting in Arizona and Utah. And of course, we aren't forgetting those of you in North Dakota, Wisconsin, Connecticut, Delaware, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Indiana, Nebraska, all the way down to Washington, California, Montana, New Jersey. So there'll be still some things happening, but we wanted to take just a little bit of a break just before we get back into it, and we'll probably spend most of the rest of the week in that regard talking about this issue of the campaign. But if you would like to join the conversation, we certainly do welcome your phone calls. 1-800-3 Today, you're on with Chris and Megan.
Hi, I just wanted to say I really appreciate what you guys are talking about and the general concept of it. Just listening over it, one of the things that really came to mind that I heard a little while ago when I saw a talk from John Bevere, it really highlighted the beginning for me and what Eve was going through. It was really interesting. I had never really heard about it that way, but Eve was tempted by the same lie that women are dealing with and people in general are dealing with today. It wasn't the bad side of the tree that she was attracted to. It was the good side of the tree. It looked good. It looked pretty. It was what tempted her. You know, Satan doesn't really over and over and over.
Yep. You know, and again, some of these cultural lies that Chris and Megan, you talk about, have been around for some time. But as I mentioned with Megan just a minute ago, I think it's been accentuated because we're a more visual culture, because of television, because of the internet, and because of social media, don't you think?
Yes, I think we are becoming so much more visually driven as a culture. And it's so true. James, you're so right. It is that the visual side of the tree that looked good, that was appealing. And of course, these same issues apply to men as well, but we uniquely address in this book women because we are women, but guys have the same struggles. And I think it's also important to realize and remember the incredible influence that men have on their wives, their girlfriends, their daughters, as far as their perception of beauty. As long as Christian men in our day continue to see that, appreciate, value women on social media or on billboards, magazines, internet, and look at pictures that draw men that may have show more skin, more cleavage, that kind of thing. It continues to feed that insecurity in Christian women who truly want to be beautiful. And I think it's important to point out that desire to be beautiful, it isn't a bad thing. That desire to be beautiful, we're hardwired to feel beautiful, want to feel beautiful by God. And that's because our God is beautiful. And we are made to want to be like Him. There's something in us that wants to reflect His beauty. And that's what we were created for. The problem is just that we look for that approval. We look for that approval of beauty in the wrong places.
Let's just, before we take another phone call, talk about the interactive study that's available and some of the resources, because there are social media downloads. There's a study that people can obtain. They can get the book, the study, all sorts of things at beautybegins.com. But just for a minute, if you could, Chris, take us through that, because those are great resources for anybody that maybe wants to teach this in a woman's study or maybe even a mixed study or even in a Sunday school class, don't you think?
That's right. At our website, beautybegins.com, you can order the book as well as order the video Bible study curriculum. Megan and I have taught this, went through it with about 1,000 women here at our church, and really opened up some great conversations between mothers and daughters, between women and their friends, between grandmothers and grandchildren, and between women and men. And we're about to do another set of Bible studies and really dig in deeper as our church has really reacted, and we found a touch point in this, and that is talking to men and giving them the opportunity to share their perspective, their point of view, and for wives to share with their husbands about, the specifics, the everyday things. What do I do that makes you feel beautiful? What things do I do that make you insecure in how you look? And how do we both look to Christ to find our true source of beauty? And I know for Carrie and I, we've gone through the process of writing this book and have really talked more about these questions and spent time in conversation, it has brought our relationship to a new level. And Carrie and I have a great marriage, but no matter where you're at, we have to still keep growing. And culture still keeps drumming things into our heads every day, or attempting to. And so we have to be on the alert. We have to be proactive and fight back and be intentional about the way we're going to discuss beauty in light of God's Word and still living in our culture, being in the world but not of it.
Again, we need to be countercultural. Let me take another phone call because I think this will get us into some of the things in your book that talk about how to maybe deal with some of those issues. So we'll head out to Kentucky this time. And Elaine, you're on with Chris and Megan.
Hi, thank you so much for addressing this subject today. I really appreciate it. I got kind of a twofold question. One, I grew up with the thought, or maybe this was just translated to me somehow, that if you tell someone that they're beautiful, especially like your child or, your sister or your mom, or especially one of your kids, I guess, that they're going to be prideful or, address, it'll kind of just make them think about themselves more or think that they're just really great or something. And so on the practical side, so I'm wondering, where does my thinking need to change on this subject? And then also on the practical side is our 4-year-old granddaughter, she's already starting to look at other little girls who have really long, pretty, straight hair, because her hair grew in slow and it's real curly, and she started to say, my hair is yucky. And if she sees pictures of little girls in books or something with curly hair, she says, they got yucky hair. So, she's already getting this false idea that there's something wrong with her, and it breaks our heart because I think she's beautiful. And I just want to know the best way to encourage her, and then also where does my thinking, on that subject need to change?
Well, again, you talk about this in the beauty of brokenness and the daily battle. So, Megan and Chris, what would you suggest for Elaine?
Well, Elaine, I am a grandmother as well, and so I can relate to you where I feel like there's something that comes along with age where you can look back over the generations and start to see some of the ways that I wish I would have done things differently, and yet there's that wondering how to change it. And first of all, to address your first question, I understand what you're saying about the hesitancy, and I think many of us in our generation grew up with that. Well, if you tell someone they're beautiful, they'll get a big head, and you don't want to create pride. But I think the reality is that what I found is that actually all of us our sinful nature is incredibly self-centered. Everyone's always thinking about themselves and how they appear to others. How do we appear to other people? And so we found, and I've tried to do this, is instead of just saying you're beautiful, not that you can say that, it's fine to say, but being specific, appreciating specific character qualities that your child or granddaughter or neighbor or whoever it is exhibits, and those are the things that we focus on. And so while I don't have any trouble with telling my daughter, honey, you look beautiful today, or when she makes extra effort, she's about to go out or does something, I think, not that that's something wrong with that, but far more often, hopefully pointing out things like, I noticed the way that you, helped out that friend who didn't have anyone to turn to and needed some help with their homework, and I know you went out of your way, and that took some extra effort on your part. I just want you to know, That's really awesome. I really appreciate the way that you're willing to sacrifice some of your own time and effort to help someone else. Or almost catching our kids being good, like doing the things, being an example of the qualities that we hope that they'll learn to emulate. Because in the end, I think our kids really want our approval, and the only way they know to get it, and generally is sadly by looks or performance, by the number grade or the trophy, the big things that stand out. The truth that I see now that I'm a grandma is that it's the small things that count more than the big ones. Everything.
Let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after these important messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
After a few more minutes, as we talk about the book Beauty Begins, Making Peace with Your Reflection, Chris Shook and Megan Shook Alpha. And again, there's information about it on our website. And Megan, let me come to you for just a minute, because we've talked about how grandmothers can have an influence, but that kind of brings us to Titus 2. It talks about and encourages older women to mentor and disciple younger women. In the book, you talk about in high school, you had Miss Thomas as your English teacher. You talked about the importance of really trying to find wise mentors. In some respects, an older woman can maybe help guide you through becoming more countercultural and not necessarily accepting some of the cultural messages, don't you think?
Yes, definitely. I think it's so important for everyone, honestly, to have a mentor that can show them in this crazy, busy world where we're distracted by social media, what truly is important and what true beauty is. And that's what I loved about Miss Thomas, is that she showed that to me. And even though I was in school with her and she was just a teacher, through her teaching and just being herself, she was able to show true beauty and to show me and the other students that what's most important in life, and that it's not getting caught up in being popular and, the makeup and the clothes you wear, but that it's your character and your personality and how loving you are and how caring you are to other people.
Let me come to you, Chris, for just a minute. As a mom, you've struggled with this, and I know that some of the most thermonuclear explosions in our household had to do when Mom suggested, sometimes forcefully, that the outfits that the young ladies in our household were going to wear outside were not appropriate. And so that's an issue that has always been around, but it's even more accentuated now in the 21st century, don't you think?
Absolutely, Kerby. There is so much pressure for our kids if they're looking at their peers to conform and want to be liked and want to be accepted. And, of course, in general, that's true through any age, but the onset of this global technology has radically magnified this effect. And so for us as parents, sure, we had peer pressure when we were in high school or college. It's nothing like what our kids face now, because maybe our grandparents used to only look at the others in their class or their town. That was their mirror. Those are the ones they compared themselves to. And then when we were growing up, Kerby, you and I, and our generation, there were TV and magazines and billboards, and we felt like it was overwhelming. Well, now with social media, literally everyone pretty much on the planet, 24/7, is commenting on each other, and you can hit the little like button and say if you like. It's very much that you put something out there, and it's, do you like me? Do you like me? Do you like me? Like screaming into a void. Do you like me? Am I accepted? Am I worthy? Am I enough? And no matter what our age or our size or our shape, or if our hair is straight or curly or long or short, there will always be someone else that we can compare ourselves to on social media who's better.
Yes.
And the problem is that it's not trying to, we think the problem is in ourselves, and we need to fix ourselves outwardly and try to be what we see in others. The truth is, God's truth is that He is the source of all beauty. That beauty begins with Him. And only in looking into His Word and His eyes will we find that true reflection of beauty that we've always longed for.
Let's take at least one more phone call. We'll head out to Georgia. Tina, tell us your story.
Yeah, I hope I can. I'm kind of the poster child of what not to do. Give me a break here. I'll get it together. I'll be 54 this year. I got into bodybuilding. I was abused as a child, but I didn't know it for a long time. So I just grew up, did life. I got into bodybuilding, anorexia really bad. I used to just exercise my brains out. That's what I would tell people. It's a lifelong journey. And it's only a healing through God. It only comes from Him. But I just feel so much for these kids for today, because they really they don't stand a chance, and it's like we're trying so hard in the church to help them, to get them, to where they need to be, to focus on Christ and to get our beauty from Christ. But it's just like a never-ending battle. And so I'm saying it from the perspective of, I really appreciate you writing the book. I've heard, a lot of stories about it. I kind of feel like I'm right kind of in the middle of my walk, but because I'm on the downhill side of, I'll just say it, I used to be hot, and now I'm not. I used to be so muscular, but I spent all of my life, all of my hours, wasted all of that time exercising and building up my body to look good, because I found my identity in that. And it was the same to what she just said. How do I look? Do I look good? What do you like what you see?
Yes.
And it's like we're so focus driven on the outside, and until we teach these girls and until they get it, it's this mind game, until they get it that our beauty is in Christ, we'll never win the battle. We'll just never win this battle. And it does. It starts so young. These girls, like that grandmother was saying, these 4-year-old girls.
Yeah,
and then
if you're 4 years old and saying that's the case, let me just, we're almost out of time, and I wanted to give Chris and Megan just a chance to respond, because I was trying to get you on as quickly as I could because I knew you are a good illustration of why they wrote the book. But Chris and Megan, what would you say?
Yes, Tina, I just want to say to you that you have never been more beautiful than you are now. You are a poster child of what true beauty is, and this is really what we need in our culture and for these young girls today is to speak up as women and say, you know what, I want to talk about this. Who better to say, you know what, this doesn't work than if I've gone down a path myself and I find out there's a giant ditch in it and I fall in and there are angry animals in there and they're clawing me up, and then my daughter's coming down the path behind me, I'm going to be yelling out as loud as I can, turn back, don't go this way. This is a horrible way to go, and let me tell you why. Instead, so often we feel shame. We feel shame about our failed attempt, as we perceive it, our failed attempt to be beautiful. And so we stay quiet and we continue to feel bad about ourselves, inadvertently passing that along to our daughters. And it's in opening up conversations and just being willing to step into the light, as Tina, as you just did, and saying, you know what, I have struggled with this, and I want to tell you, this path isn't a good one, and this is why. And so, and our hope is that through Beauty Begins and going to the website, beautybegins.com, we can begin these conversations that are so important if we're going to redeem this next generation.
That's one of the reasons I wanted to bring Tina on, just to bring some reality to what we are talking about here today. And Chris and Megan, again, we can encourage them to go to beautybegins.com. You can get the book, you can get the study there, you can download a chapter, you can, of course, get the resources, the study guide. There's some social media downloads, all sorts of great resources. And so in the midst of all the other things we're talking about, I felt this was an important issue to bring before the church. And thank you so very much, Chris and Megan, for writing it. And I wish you well in terms of getting as much publicity out there, because the church needs to understand that this is a topic that needs to be addressed from a biblical point of view. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Kerby. And we so appreciate your stand on so many issues, but we really appreciate you standing up for women and for the truth of beauty. So thank you.
Okay, Beauty Begins, and again, you can go to the website that we have there. It is published by Waterbrook. You might find it in a local bookstore, but we have all sorts of other resources that they would be glad to give to you. And I hope that those of you that are pastors and Bible fellowship leaders and Sunday school teachers consider covering this as well. What we're going to be covering in the second hour is, of course, the election taking place today. Many of you have voted, and this is an important day for those of you in Florida and Illinois and Missouri and North Carolina and Ohio. Do want to hear from you, but I'm also going to hear from Buddy Pilgrim, who is the National Director for Faith and Religious Liberty for Ted Cruz. So all that coming up right after this.
Columbia Pictures presents, in association with Affirm Films, Miracles from Heaven. When 10-year-old Anna Beam develops a rare incurable disease, her mother devotes herself to finding a solution.
Miracles are everywhere.
Then, after Anna has a freak accident, a miracle unfolds. How do we explain the impossible? Miracles from Heaven, starring Jennifer Garner. In theaters Wednesday, March 16th. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. More information is available at miraclesfromheaven-movie.com.
How critical is the 2016 election? Well, the next president will very likely appoint at least 2, even 3 Supreme Court justices. Our on-budget debt is approaching $20 trillion, and the threats of war and terrorism all too real. Given these things, we're asking you to pray for our nation and to educate and encourage others to get involved. Sign up today at pointofview.net. We'll send reminders to help you pray, organize, and vote. Pointofview.net. Click on the banner, Pray, Organize, Vote. The future of America is at stake. We need to pray. Pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Election day for many of you that are listeners, and so again, some of you have already voted, some of you are voting today, and I know some of you are on the periphery saying, when do we get our chance? Those of you in Arizona, Utah, Wisconsin, North Dakota, New York, and just a number of other states, you're coming up next. But today we're going to focus on Florida, 99 different delegates at stake in a winner-take-all, and Ohio, 63 delegates also in a winner-take-all. Then also we have Missouri, 66 delegates, Missouri 49 delegates, Illinois 66 delegates, and North Carolina 69 delegates. You add that up with Northern Marianas, which are another 6, and you have 352 delegates at stake today. And this is why you're starting to see some of the comments being made, for example, by Ted Cruz and others. Ted Cruz was in Peoria, Illinois, one of the places where we broadcast, and he said, if you're here today or at home watching on TV thinking about supporting Marco Rubio or John Kasich, I say to you that they are good men, but they do not have a path to winning. He said it's mathematically impossible for them to win, so I say come and join us. We welcome you with open arms. He recognizes that there was no reason for him to try to compete in Florida or in Ohio, so he's focused his time and attention on Illinois. Just a few minutes, we'll have Buddy Pilgrim with us. He is the National Director for Faith and Religious Liberty with the Ted Cruz campaign. He'll give us some more perspective on that and also deal with some of the religious questions surfacing around Ted Cruz. And tomorrow, of course, the religious questions surfacing around Donald Trump, as we have Robert Jeffers in studio. So we'll get into all of that. But if you look at where we stand right now before the election takes place tonight, the Republicans need 1,237. You probably have memorized that number by now, 1,237 delegates to win the nomination. And really, you only have about 1,400 delegates left. And so this is where, in some respects, it would be more helpful for a Ted Cruz if he could possibly get into a two-man race. But as I will point out in just a minute, it is not clear at all that individuals that in the past would have voted for or have voted for Ben Carson, Jeb Bush, even John Kasich, Marco Rubio would necessarily vote for Ted Cruz. But nevertheless, that's the number that is being used. Now, one of the things that the Wall Street Journal did was they said, okay, let's consider the delegate math after tonight. And we'll spend more time about that, obviously, tomorrow, talking about that. If Donald Trump wins Florida and Missouri, loses Ohio, and picks up chunks of delegates in Illinois and North Carolina, he'd still then have about 687 of the delegates necessary, and, of course, needs 1,237 to win the nomination. By that time, then, there will only be about 1,012 delegates up for grabs or unbound in the remaining states, and so then Donald Trump would have to win about 550 or about 54% of those. So in some respects, if Ted Cruz can at least stay competitive with him, then it is theoretically possible that Donald Trump might not arrive in Cleveland with the requisite 1,237 delegates. But I think that is becoming more of a foregone conclusion, and we'll see, of course, what happens tonight. Of course, it isn't all that clear, as the Wall Street Journal says, that Mr. Cruz will beat Mr. Trump one-on-one, given the primary contests that remain. That is the big question I think the Cruz people have to start asking themselves, because in the past, let's be honest, Ted Cruz has done better in the South, not always though, or in GOP-only caucuses or various things where there has been not an open primary. But the question they ask is, would Ted Cruz beat Donald Trump in Arizona, Connecticut, Delaware, Maryland, New Jersey, New York, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Washington, or Wisconsin? And they even point out that John Kasich might do better. And if he wins tonight in Ohio, then maybe he'll stay in. If he does not win, I don't know what happens at that point. The big issue is that the latest poll that has come out, and that is the Economist YouGov poll. If you assume that these polls are accurate, and you know the disclaimer I've given you all the way through this campaign season, sometimes these polls aren't as accurate as they can be because it's difficult to oftentimes guess and get a good estimate on who is actually going to show up to vote. But taking the poll as it is, Donald Trump has now broken 50% in terms of national support among Republicans. The highest he had was a few weeks ago, and that was at 44%. But when Donald Trump is at 50%, it, I think, illustrates a point that we've made before, and that is just because Ben Carson drops out or even a Marco Rubio drops out doesn't necessarily mean that those votes go against Donald Trump. Some of them decide to go to Donald Trump, some of them go to Ted Cruz, and so that certainly is an important issue. A couple more things I want to put on the table. One of the articles I've posted here today for you is a piece on the political class is losing. And it's actually written by Senator David Perdue, Why Washington's Political Class is Losing. And he said, as you look at a survey of likely Republican primary voters, it showed that 86% believe that, quote, people like me don't have any say about what government does, unquote. Another recent exit poll in his home state there of Georgia showed that 6 in 10 Republicans said they felt, quote, betrayed by their political party. And so what you are seeing right now is just a reaction to the political class. You has pointed out, David Perdue, senator from Georgia, that the rise of career politicians has completely shifted the political paradigm from just liberal versus conservative. He says now there's a disconnect between the Washington political class and everybody else, the insiders versus the outsiders. And I think it is telling that when you look at this, we are in many cases talking about insurgent candidates doing very well. We're really down to the last two candidates, to be honest, on the Republican side, and those are Donald Trump and Ted Cruz. And they have collected, between the two of them, probably 80% of all the Republican votes. And so it illustrates only so well that this particular electorate is very much ready to put in somebody who is going to challenge the establishment, shake up Washington, D.C. And so in some respects, even though Donald Trump and Ted Cruz are very different on a lot of issues, and I'm not minimizing those at all, they certainly have one very significant issue in common, and that is they are both perceived pretty much as outsiders. They are seen as individuals willing to challenge the status quo. And so as a result, they have had the disproportionate number of votes. But let's take a break, and then when we come back, I'll also open up the phones because you may want to ask some questions or make some comments. Wanted to bring on Buddy Pilgrim today. He's the National Director for Faith and Religious Liberty for Ted Cruz for President. And he is an individual that has been a minister, but he has also taken time to work on the Cruz campaign. Tomorrow, as we have mentioned more than once, I think, we also have Robert Jeffress in studio tomorrow. We're going to be talking about his book, but also after the primaries tonight, I'm sure he'll want to say some things tomorrow, and I know I want to ask him some questions. I suspect you'll want to ask him some questions, too, about Donald Trump. So those are sort of the topics that we've put on the table here. But if you'd like to join the conversation at any point, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back with more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Two questions I hear with some regularity are, what is the FBI going to do, and when is the FBI going to do it? The questions surrounding the current investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails and apparent disregard for national security. As I've mentioned in the previous commentaries, other people have been indicted for much less. The Democratic debates and primaries are taking place right now, and the Democratic National Convention takes place a few months from now in July. Few Democratic voters seem concerned about the email scandal, but they will be very concerned if the FBI recommends an indictment. The Democratic Party might also want to reconsider whether they would run Hillary Clinton for the presidency. Actually indicts her would actually upset the nominating process. The delegates of the convention might want to consider another candidate like Joe Biden or even Bernie Sanders. Of course, there's the possibility that even if the FBI recommends indictment, Attorney General Loretta Lynch would refuse to do so. She might argue that the evidence was not sufficient. She might argue that an indictment would politicize the political campaign. If the Attorney General did not actually indict, what would be the response from the FBI Director James Comey? I assume that he and some of his staff might resign. Those of us who lived through the Watergate scandal might remember that Elliot Richardson and William Ruckelshaus actually resigned rather than carry out President Nixon's order. People who know James Comey say he probably would not resign, but instead release the incriminating information surrounding Hillary Clinton's actions. That would certainly have a negative influence on her campaign. It's time for the FBI and the Attorney General to act so that Democratic primary voters and general election voters can make an intelligent decision on who will serve as president. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Columbia Pictures and Affirm Films, Miracles from Heaven. How do we explain the impossible? In theaters March 16th, rated PG. miraclesfromheaven-movie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Looking at election 2016, and if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Bring to the microphone now, a privilege to have with us Buddy Pilgrim, National Director for Faith and Religious Liberty for the Ted Cruz for President campaign, and has been so involved in the campaign, really speaking to pastors and others. As you may know, he is the former president of Pilgrim's Pride Corporation, the world's second largest chicken company, as well as an ordained and licensed minister who, through his ministry, Integrity Leadership, talks about biblical principles for the application in business and politics. Buddy, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you, Kerby. It's such an honor to be here and speak with your audience and with you.
We were talking about Ted Cruz in Illinois, and we have callers that are in places like Peoria, Illinois, where he's saying it's mathematically impossible for Marco Rubio or John Kasich to win. So, and I agree with that, by the way. We ran through the numbers just a minute ago. So it really is basically Donald Trump and Ted Cruz, don't you think?
It's absolutely a two-man race. Ted's only 90 delegates behind Trump at this point, and he's the only one that's that close. He's the only one who has a mathematical chance of gaining 1,237 other than Trump, of gaining 1,237 delegates prior to the convention.
And so let's, if we can, maybe talk about your role, because, Buddy, there are all sorts of questions people have. Now, tomorrow they're going to have questions about some of the religious issues surrounding Donald Trump, but let's talk about those. Most of our listeners, I've never met Ted Cruz, never interviewed him. I've seen him on a stage. So tell me a little bit more about his faith and how you actually have been able to reach out to people in the religious community.
Well, let me address Senator Cruz first, because I've known him since he began his run for the Senate here in Texas. Did not know him before that. Even when he was Solicitor General, I didn't know him, but I met him at the very beginning of his run for Senate. Got to know him very well. I listened to him talk about the fact that he was going to go to Washington to change it and not let it change him. And then I've watched him do exactly what he says. He is a man who will tell you what he will do, and then will do exactly what he says, which is why I've decided to get behind him for this presidential race. And let me sum him up the way that I do most of the time when I speak to people who've never had the opportunity to meet him and get to know him as well as I have over the last 4 years. And, Kerby, I've been involved in conservative politics for over 30 years. I've been very active in conservative politics in Texas. And I will say this, more than any other candidate, bar none, for office that I've ever met in the last 30 years, and more than any other office holder that I've met in the last 30 years, Ted Cruz is guided in every decision he makes by two sets of core principles. One is his faith. He is a believing Christian, very dedicated to his faith, and it is his faith that informs and forms the values which guide his decisions. So he's guided by two things, his faith, and the second is his fidelity to the Constitution. And if you've ever heard the stories about Ted Cruz, you'll know that from the time he was 13 years old, he memorized the entire U.S. Constitution. And when he was in high school, he traveled around the country giving lectures and speeches on the Constitution as a teenager, where he and a group of other students would literally handwrite out on easels, because I've seen lots of politicians, lots of office holders, lots of candidates for office, and I've never met any that were more founded in their faith and the fidelity to the Constitution than Ted Cruz. And both of those things are important because they both provide boundaries and limits for him. His faith informs his values, but his limits are also placed upon him by the Constitution that he knows so very well.
You know, we've had Rafael Cruz both in studio and by phone, and we've certainly learned some about him in that regard. But let me take on a couple of issues that I know are swirling, and one of those is, since you are talking about biblical principles and as they apply to business and politics, there's some right now that are saying things like, well, you know, the Bible really doesn't provide a checklist for politics, because after all, you didn't elect people back in the first century. But don't we have biblical principles that should guide us in terms of how we vote?
We do. I've heard that exact same quote before. It's astounding that somebody in ministry would make a statement like that, because, first of all, that would imply that if something didn't exist in Bible days, we can't find direction in the Bible for it today. And the Bible is the best handbook for life that's ever been written. It provides a direction for every decision we ever will make in life. And there are many places. Exodus 18:21 talks about selecting among yourselves leaders of thousands, hundreds, and tens of thousands, and it gives criteria. Able men, such as fear God, men of truth who hate dishonest gain. That's a set of criteria right there. And you notice the first thing listed is an able man, one capable of doing the job. Acts chapter 6, verse 3 is another place. Without going through all of the detail of that, that's where they're talking about, some would say deacons. It says people who are going to serve tables. So this is not people that are in the ministry, okay? These are people who are doing the work of serving other people. Well, that's what a public servant is. And it says, select from among you, brethren, men of good reputation, full of the Spirit, full of wisdom, whom we may put in charge of this task. 1 Timothy 3, verses 8 through 14 talk about criteria as well for selecting deacons in the church. There is criteria throughout the Bible that tells us as Christians how to select people that we put in positions of power and authority and responsibility, and not the least of those is Proverbs 14:31, which tells us in general, righteousness exalts a nation, and we need to put righteous leaders in place.
Throughout the hour, we'll certainly be taking phone calls, but I want to pick off one or two that relate very much to some of the things that Buddy Pilgrim is sharing with us. So let's go to Georgia and the Good News Network. And Jerry, I think you had a comment, and I'd love to hear Buddy's response to it. Go ahead.
Yes, my comment is basically all Christians. If there ever a time that we need to pray and look at our election, this is the time. Because if we just think of what's been said a lot of us people saying that Ben Carson, oh, what a great candidate he would be for president. And then a lot of people talk how bad Donald Trump is. But then look what the surprise is. The surprise is Ben Carson does what?
He endorses him, yeah. I mean, I can't wait till the next time I get Ben Carson on the program to get on that. You know, it seems to me that, Buddy, certainly it's important to pray about our decision, and we certainly have our Pray, Organize, and Vote election resources and encourage people to take the pledge that they will pray for this nation, they will encourage others, they will educate themselves, and they actually will pray. But it seems to me we need a little bit more than that, and we need to really evaluate a person's character. There are a few people, to be honest with you, that are scratching their head when they see some endorsements from Jerry Falwell, or, of course, Robert Jeffress will be with us tomorrow, or Ben Carson, or a number of other individuals. Any thoughts about that?
Well, they're astounding to me because as a Christian, I know that I want someone who's conservative. I want a Republican over a Democrat because Democrats in general are in favor of homosexual marriage and they're in favor of abortion. So I clearly want a Republican over a Democrat because of the Republican platform. But there are several good Republicans to choose from. There have been through the course of this race, and now it's down to Ted and to Donald Trump. And I'll tell you, between those two, Ted is a man that is guided by his faith, founded by the Constitution. And let me mention just one thing. I know we're tight on time right now, and that is the importance of having a candidate who knows how to evaluate what I'm going to call judicial mindset. We know that the next president is going to pick anywhere from 2 to 4 Supreme Court nominees and many appellate court nominees. Ted Cruz has 3 extremely unique qualifications to help him do that. He used to clerk for Justice Rehnquist. Second is he has argued 9 times before the Supreme Court. Third, he's written more than 70 briefs before the Supreme Court. And fourth, he is a trained constitutional lawyer. That gives him the unique ability, especially those first 3 things, to understand what I call judicial mindset.
Yes.
And to help pick the right one, because let me tell you, that is going to be a decision that lasts for generations beyond the term of the next president.
Boy, I'm so concerned about who will be picked in the next 2 or 3 appointments to the Supreme Court, and so that's certainly an issue. First of all, I want to encourage people to go to integrityleadership.org because they can find out a lot more about you. And certainly, of course, we always encourage people to find out more about the candidates, which we have links to. And hope we can call on you again because you have done such a great job of thinking through how we apply biblical principles, not only to who we elect as president, but every individual in office. So thank you so very much for your stand and for your desire over these many years to apply biblical principles to both business and politics. We need more Christian leaders, both in politics and business, don't we?
Absolutely. Thank you, Kerby. God bless. It's an honor to be with you today.
Let's do it again. And when we come back, we'll take some more of your phone calls. I see some of you say, I don't want to vote. Others say, I want to vote for this person. Frankly, I want to hear from some of you in places like Illinois and North Carolina, as well as Florida and Missouri and Ohio, all these places where we are talking about a very important election taking place today, and I'd love to know who you voted for and what your thoughts are about the future of this country and the presidential campaign. So let's take a break. We'll come back and give you some chances to address the issues. Also want to talk about some of the issues of campaign violence that people have been talking about. All that coming up right after this.
Later this year, for the 58th time, America will choose a president. As a Christian, what are you doing to prepare for the election? Helping you cut through the major media spin is part of the mission of Point of View. We want to provide the best election resources, including a new website, Pray, Organize, Vote, encouraging people to intercede for the upcoming election, to help you get registered so you can exercise the stewardship of voting, to share things to help you get people involved and out to the polls. But to do all of that, we need you to vote right now with your support for Point of View. Show us that you're in this for the long haul as a citizen of heaven as well as the United States. Click Donate Now at the top of the page and give the most generous one-time gift you can at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. There is a lot of work to be done. Let's get to it together. Pointofview.net. and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take some phone calls, but also I want to spend a little bit of time talking about how the press has been covering some of the campaign violence surrounding Donald Trump. By a 15-1 margin, the networks blame Donald Trump, not the individuals that are actually doing the violent acts. So we'll get into some of that in just a minute. But let's, if I can, hear from a few of you how you voted today. Let's head out to Peoria, Illinois, WPEO. Brittany, tell me who you voted for today.
Hello. My family and I all voted for Ted Cruz today.
And you might want to tell us why, because some people say, well, you've got a couple of choices, but out of those four at least remaining candidates, why Ted Cruz?
Yes, we believe he is a true conservative who will fight for the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, our religious liberty, and the First and Second Amendment, and our freedoms as Americans. He's got a proven record of doing so, and we know that he can keep his promises, and he will keep his promises when he goes to Washington. He's not a regular old career politician who's going to go in there and break all his promises even our President Obama has done. He hasn't kept any of his promises, but this time we can know for sure that we can vote for someone who will stand for what he believes in and fight for us as Americans.
Well, I appreciate you calling, and we'll follow what happens there. It looked like the Cruz campaign decided that Ohio was going to possibly go to John Kasich, and Florida was out of reach and probably will go to Donald Trump. And so we'll see what happens in some of these other important cases in Illinois, North Carolina, and, of course, Missouri. So thank you for calling today. Let's head to Alabama on the Good News Network. Kamal, thank you for calling today.
Hey, how you doing, my friend?
Yes, what would you like to add to our conversation?
Well, I was telling your screener just a minute ago, I'm a United States Marine, and I gotten to the point where I'm so disgusted with this whole process, man. I watch, I'm to the point where I don't trust any of them. I mean, I hear what all of them have to say, and I paid real close attention to all of them. And I mean, I've been asking God to help me because I mean, honestly, I don't trust any of them. I'm at that point now where I don't. I went out at a Donald Trump rally. I watched a guy punch a man in the face. He sat back down, and the police jumped on the guy who got punched in the face. And I'm like, really? I mean, it's like other countries are laughing at us now.
Well, that is true. But again, I'm not going to defend Donald Trump. You know that by now. But I don't think that had anything to do with Donald Trump. I think it had a lot to do with individuals that took advantage of a situation. But go ahead.
Yes, sir. I believe you. I don't blame Donald Trump for that. Some of his rhetoric, could. I mean, we've seen people listen to what crazies have had to say and went out and done something stupid. But I blame the person who done it. I don't.
Personal responsibility. That's right. Good point.
But I don't know, man. Like I said, I'm praying and I'm asking God to help me figure this out because I'm at a point where I'm like, is this the best we got? In our great country, is this the best
every
we
year
got?
we sort of say, or every 4 years we seem to say that. First of all, Kamal, I want to say thank you for your service, and no matter who it is, somebody's going to be commander-in-chief. Maybe you'll be glad you're out of the military, but somebody's going to be overseeing the military, and I'd certainly think that there are better choices than others. Not that I think all of them are perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but you're kind of down to four, two on the Democratic side, two on the Republican side. But
yes, sir.
You're not the only person out here saying, I don't know how to vote. I got some real questions.
I think this will be the first. This is probably the first year that every year it kind of seems that way, but I mean, every voting season kind of seems that way, and I make my decision at the last minute probably. But I mean, there's no way I could vote for Donald Trump. I'm sorry. I don't trust that guy at all. Ted Cruz, I do believe, just like what the young lady was saying, but nobody likes him. I mean, why is that? Why is it that no one in the Senate
That's a little strong. He did get endorsed the other day by Mike Lee, and probably will get some other endorsements.
Right.
But back to the point. I hope that you will vote, even if you don't vote for the president. Yeah. You have a Senate election in Alabama this year, and you've got a couple of other local case races that you can vote for, even if you have to skip over the top. And of course, I hope you'll think through some of that before now in November. But
I am.
Yeah. Hey, I appreciate you calling, though. I
Thanks a
appreciate
lot.
your honesty, and thank you again for your service. We will always be indebted to those of you that have served in the armed services. Since he raised that question, let me bring it up real quickly. The people at Newsbusters, which is part of the Media Research Center, actually looked at ABC, CBS, and NBC, and they followed 45 segments totaling 85 minutes of airtime dealing with these the campaign violence. They found that reporters criticized the Trump campaign 46 times. How many times did they actually criticize the protesters? 3. 46 to 3. That's kind of a 15-1 margin. So in 3 days, it says, we examined our analysts and found a mere 3 instances where the network reporters blamed the protests for the chaos that unfolded. As a matter of fact, I thought it was kind of interesting because on ABC World News tonight, David Wright explained how Trump haters infiltrated the arena bent on disruption. And then they showed a soundbite from a demonstrator saying Donald Trump is not welcome in Chicago, and we're going to make it clear today. My argument to our fellow people in the media is at least you could try to be fair. This piece by Heather McDonald is well done. It appeared in National Review, in which she goes through, and I can't even say some of this on the air, by the way, it blanked the police, talking about all the different protests, murderer cops, racism is a disease, stop police terror. There have been assignments that have been given out. In defense of looting was an assignment that some people were to write in. Looting isn't violent. It's just an expression of anger. Some of these were saying. Then you even have presidential candidates like Hillary Clinton says that reality is that cops see black lives as cheap. Bernie Sanders says killing of unarmed black police by police officers has been going on decade after decade after decade. In fact, as she points out here, among the 36, quote, unarmed black men killed by the police last year, compared with 31 unarmed white men, a large percentage have been trying to grab the officer's gun, were pummeling the officer with his own equipment, or were otherwise viciously fighting with the arresting officer. But the point is that you almost never see coverage of all the really hateful and divisive things said on the other side. And so then to say that what happens in these events is due to some of the rhetoric of Donald Trump, and believe me, I'm not defending some of the crazy things that Donald Trump says, but I just think that those in the media, if they're really going to be outraged by what is happening at some of those rallies, they should also be somewhat outraged, don't you think, about some of the kinds of T-shirts and other things said at some of these other protests. At least worth to think about. Let's take some more phone calls here. And in Missouri, KNEO. Gary, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah,
I know that Missouri is going to have vote today, so I know you wanted to add some other things besides just the elections, so go for it.
Yes, me and my wife both went down and voted for Cruz. I wonder if you've read the book Dark Forces by Ken Timmerman.
I am very familiar with Ken. He's been on the program with us in the past. I'd like to get him on again. So tell us why we would like to hear from him and read his book.
Yeah, I'd like to hear that book mentioned a lot on the air, because it tells the facts on what Hillary Clinton did in Benghazi. She's a murderer, flat-out murderer. They was hiring small armies, 100 men each or something, to go to kill the leader of that country. Of course, it took them a while, but they finally killed him, and I don't know what they did to his body. I think they sodomized him after he was dead with knives or something, swords or something. It was sick, really. But anyhow, I didn't know if you'd ever read it, but it's the most informative thing I've ever heard or got a hold of on Benghazi.
Again, the actual title is Dark Forces, The Truth About What Happened in Benghazi. And it is Ken Timmerman. And Ken, for a while there, was running for office in Maryland, so kind of let him run his campaign. But when we get a chance, we'll maybe bring him back and give him a chance to explain everything he investigated. He's done a great job of investigative reporting. And, of course, then he was running a campaign, so we kind of let him go and run his campaign. But I think he's out now, so that will give him a chance maybe to join us. So thank you very much, and we'll certainly recommend the book.
I wanted to tell you, Kerby, I started listening to Marlon Maddox when he went on satellite. 35, 40 years ago, probably 35 or something.
Sounds like you're almost as old as I am, and that's old. That's really good. That's
I'm
great.
older than dirt. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary.
Yeah, we'll see. Bye.
Let me just mention real quick. He said Dark Shadows. It's actually Dark Forces. But yes, it's Ken Timmerman. Ken's been on the program with us talking about so many good books over the years, but this one is certainly another one of his great investigative stories about Benghazi. I'm familiar with it. I have not read it. I always tend to read the books just before we do the interview so that I can remember what's in them. If I read them like a month ahead, then I'll go back and say, now, I think you said, did you say that? And so I always try to wait to read the book before we do the interview, if that makes sense. It makes it a little more interesting for you to follow as well. Let's take a break. A lot more of you want to talk, and we'll give you that opportunity right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me just mention that tomorrow we will spend some time in the first hour looking over the votes that come in from Florida and Ohio, Illinois, Missouri, North Carolina. And then the second hour we'll have Robert Jefferson. We'll be talking about his new book, but I'm sure we'll have some questions for him about Donald Trump as well. And of course, you, as always, can join the conversation with him and with me. So again, those of you that voted today, I'd love to hear how you voted. So let's head back to Missouri. Gary wanted to talk about the book, but Kate, I think you want to tell us who you voted for and tell us why.
Yes, I voted for Ted Cruz, and I did because I watched him, and I remember when the shutdown came, and when he did what the people asked him to do.
And I can remember how the establishment just were, they were terrible to him, rude, very rude. And so I find him to stand up for what he says he's going to do. And he's a great constitutionalist, and we haven't had anybody like that for such a long time. It would be wonderful to have somebody that was actually the president that understood the Constitution that they're supposed to be representing.
It's so good. I mean, I think I've told the story before that, and I used to, before I did this talk show, of course, occasionally I was a guest host for Marlon Maddox, but I used to speak a lot more on college campuses because that's one of the opportunities I did with Pro Ministries. And sometimes I'd be in a law school class. You'd have some kid in law school say something about separation of church and state. And I used to, in the old days, keep a kind of a pocket constitution with me, and I go, can you help me out? Where is that? This idea of separation, church and state, and hand it to them. And if they, most of the time, I'd say, look, I'll not embarrass you. The word separation, church, state, none of those words are even in the Constitution. This whole thing that you think's in the Constitution is not. And you're in a constitutional class, and you're not even studying the Constitution. You're studying all the decisions that have come back after. The Constitution was written after the Bill of Rights was enacted. But anyway, it would be nice to have somebody that really understands the Constitution as president. Let's take a few more phone calls. We'll head out to Texas here. KBJS. David, thank you for joining us today.
How are we doing today?
I'm good. I would love to hear from you.
Well, Kerby, I'm just kind of appalled at the Republican leaders, party leaders who have said that they would vote for Hillary.
I know. I said that last week, and I think some people thought I was making it up. I mean, I was not making it up. And today, it's really gotten very, very strong. There are a number of them just saying, I just don't know if I can really vote for Donald Trump. I think I'm just going to maybe vote for Hillary Clinton. Really?
And this gentleman a while ago said he wasn't even going to vote. My point is, Trump, and honestly, I hope Trump is not the candidate, but if he is, I'm sorry, I have to vote Republican. Maybe we can deal with him afterwards, and he'll listen to us. I don't know. I do have questions about how Republican he is. I have questions about how Christian he really is. Granted, he says things that we want to hear, and he's got ideas that need to be done and everything, but I don't know that he really is the best candidate.
Well,
Cruz is, as far as I'm concerned. But the point is, though, that any vote for a third party or stepping outside of the Republican Party to vote naturally is a vote for the Democrats. But even not to vote is a vote for the Democratic Party.
And the reason for that is because of the way the Electoral College is, because already, as I've pointed out on numerous occasions here, Hillary Clinton starts with an incredible advantage, anywhere from 217 assured electoral votes up to 246, depending on which count you use. Mm-hmm. And you only need 270. So it doesn't take long to figure out that non-vote is a vote for the Democrat. And that probably will be Hillary, or it could be Bernie. I doubt it is, but it's probably Hillary.
And just remember what we got when we actually did vote for a third party, namely Ross Perot, and we got a Clinton.
Well, and again, glad you're bringing that up, because you recognize we have a fair number of listeners, younger listeners, that were maybe just born then, maybe in diapers in grade school, and they don't remember that. So it's important to bring that up again.
But anyway, the Republicans, folks, get out and vote.
Good job.
Don't sit home and not vote, and don't vote for a third party, please.
Good word. Good word. Let me real quickly, I'm just going to go through a few more real quickly. I wanted to head out to North Carolina. And David, I guess you're going to vote, so tell us how it's going there today.
Well, I am planning to vote. Have not yet, but the polls close at 7:30. I'm going to pick up my wife. She's at work, and we're planning to vote. But I'm planning to vote for Ted Cruz. And I know there are several people I've talked to that are planning to go to or for Trump. However, I cannot support him due to his past support for liberals and liberal causes, just the unfaithfulness in his marriages, the support for the casinos and the strip clubs. Some of the Christian leaders who seem to be backing him. I do not understand that. I don't think that enough has come out about his true past to really make people, I guess, sit up and take notice. To me, it's a difference in character, no character. I think the thing that bothers me most is that I don't see any real commitment to principle coming from Trump. In other words, he can seems like he can be, one way one time and one way at another time. So that's why I am supporting Ted Cruz. I'm very concerned about the direction of our country. I don't think we have a whole lot more time to turn things around. Cruz has stood up. He has filibustered when he needs to, and I feel like that we need someone who is willing to take a stand and do what's right. Even today, the Congress and the House and the Senate, Republican controlled, and yet it seems like that many of them, the leadership, is not taking a principled stand for that which is right and in the best interest of America.
Good point. Well, wish you well on the voting. We'll see how North Carolina turns out tonight when we watch that. And let me just see if I can sneak in one more phone call. Eric, I don't have a lot of time, but I know you're up there at KNEO in Missouri, and tell me who you voted for today.
Well, my family and I, we sat around and discussed between, of course, Trump and Cruz, undecided. And finally, the thing that pushed us over for Cruz is the fact that he said that drafting women was crazy, and Donald Trump didn't say that. So that's why we went with Cruz. The fact that he's a Christian, of course, Donald claims to be as well. There were both, in our book, there were pluses and minuses in both. I'm sick of career politicians, and sorry that Ted is one and Donald isn't. But anyway, after we talked it over, finally what pushed us over the top was the fact that Ted would not want to draft women and Donald would, so we went with Ted.
Well, very good. And there, of course, as you said, pluses and minuses and positives and negatives, and we'll probably hear some of those again tomorrow. So
right. The only thing that we do not like about Ted Cruz is that we think he's a rabid Zionist, and we have a problem with that because we think that those are people being treated unfairly over there in Palestine, and so we go with Miko Peled, and who is a Jew himself, and talks about discussion, and we don't like that about Ted, but other than that, we're with him.
Okay. Well, again, you've all had a chance to express your opinion, and I still have individuals that would like to call in and join the conversation, but we are out of time. But you know what? We have a lot of time tomorrow. It is going to be coverage, certainly, for the first hour on the votes tonight that will be counted. And then, of course, we have Robert Jefferson studio, and we'll certainly talk about his new book, which is a fascinating book, because not all paths lead to heaven, and pluralism, but I'm sure he'll also want to say some things about Donald Trump, and I suspect you'll want to ask him some questions. And some of you have said, well, we'd like to have a chance to hear from some of these Christian leaders, and if Ben Carson wants to come in here, or Jerry Falwell Jr. wants to come in here, we'll give them that opportunity. That's why the program is called Point of View. We give you a chance to express your point of view. That's all we have for today. Let me again encourage you to visit our website, pointofview.net. Pray, organize, and vote. Take the pledge. And I want to thank Andrew, Catherine, and Shamila for their help behind the scenes. I'll see you back here tomorrow.
Is it just me, or does this year's election seem more contentious than ever? Even Christians are divided between which candidate to support, but one thing we must agree upon is the need to pray together. Each and every one of us must be on our knees asking God's mercy. Who is the right one to name the next Supreme Court justice, or 2 or 3? Honestly, I don't know, but God does, and we must petition Him to act. Point of View has created its own campaign in the midst of the presidential campaign, Pray, Organize, Vote. We want to remind you of things to pray about. We want to help you educate fellow believers and get them out to vote. Sign up today at pointofview.net. Click on the banner, Pray, Organize, and Vote. The future of America is at stake, and God's people are called to be good stewards of our votes. After you sign up, look at the bottom right corner for the red box that says Donate. Your gift will educate and motivate Christians during this critical time. Don't put it off. Visit now, pointofview.net. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all